And we're recording. Hi, everybody. This is Mark Pirtle with Skillfully Aware, and I'm so grateful to be with Scarlett Lewis. She is the amazing founder of the Jesse Lewis Choose Love movement, and we're going to talk about grief today. And I thought that we'd start the conversation about grief and the videos that I want to share about grief with conversation with Scarlett, because her movement, her present work in the world started as a result of tragic situation. And yeah, Scarlett, do you want to just introduce yourself and how you came sort of to become an expert at this topic?
I don't know that I'm an expert, but I am willing to weigh in on it and my experience. I lost my 6-year-old son, Jesse McCord Lewis, at Sandy Hook Elementary School in Newtown, Connecticut on December 14th, 2012, when a former student shot his way through the glass doors and murdered 20 first graders and 6 educators after he had murdered his mother when he left that morning, and then he killed himself. And it's been an interesting journey. I try to call it an adventure after I started the Jesse Lewis Choose Love movement. But, you know, it's something that I remember. I'll just share a quick memory. Early on, one of the nice things that I think the state did for us was they sent in like therapists to go with us to like the wake and the funeral, and they came and introduced themselves. It was a woman and her assistant, I guess, and her assistant was there because she had lost a son too. And so when she said, I lost a son too, my eyes locked on her because I hadn't talked to anybody who had lost a child. And I was looking at her like, I'm thinking, you survived this? Well, how do you move forward? And she said, I'm here to tell you your pain's never going to get better. And I just remember having to make a decision right then and there. I held my hand up and I said, stop right there. That may be your journey. That is not going to be my journey, because I knew I couldn't live with the pain that I was feeling. And it was kind of a few in the moment decisions that I made along the way that have really helped strengthen me. And that was one of them.
So let's talk about grief, because I've done some thinking prior to us talking today, and I was trying to puzzle out the difference between grief and sadness. And to me, sadness always is associated with an event that I seem to get over, that's sort of situational, and then I can actually forget that I'd been sad and move on. But the things that I grieve, the loss of my grandfather, and other tremendous losses that I've experienced in my life, you know, I can, if I really put myself in a state where I'm attuning to those losses, the pain is still there, the emotion still comes up. And so I don't know if you necessarily get over the grief, but certainly there's a way to make it workable. Is that your experience as well?
It is. I find sadnesses come up and they move through. But grief it's almost like it becomes woven into your DNA. And I think grief is associated with the loss of something that you loved. And it's much more significant. And I feel like sometimes with grief, it's almost like a connection to that love. And it's, of course, grieving is painful, and it's you don't want to associate that connection with pain, but you feel that connection through the
Yeah.
pain. And I try to remind myself that that love that was there with Jessie is still there, and it doesn't have to be associated with pain. But it's hard. It's hard.
Yeah.
And like it's 7 years, and I know people have lost, and they're not quite to 7 years, and they're way out, but it's like right there. I always, like, people say, well, oh, I don't want to remind you. And I just think, or they say, I don't want to remind your son, JT, Jesse's older brother. And I say, you're never going to remind us, because it's like always right there.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I like how you liken grief to kind of like the love relationship, like that connection remains, and that grief is associated with something that's lost. You know that Linda and I have a daughter, Alana, and she's 9 years old, and I can already feel myself getting sad. So when Alana was about to turn 5, she came up to me and she said, Dad, are you going to miss the 4-year-old me?
That's precious.
Yeah. And of course.
Yeah,
Like
we do.
Yeah. Yeah. And it that sense of loss of the child you can't hang on to.
Yeah, and I think that's a really important thing about grief, is that we move through it and we grieve many things. And sometimes we don't identify them as grief, but they are. And grief is a normal part of life. Everyone grieves. And, one of the things that I learned, having lost a son in a mass tragedy, and then having an older son that went back into the school system, was how much fear there was and misunderstanding around grief. And, it was interesting because JT was 12 years old, and he was a 7th grader. He went back about a month after his little brother was murdered. And for years, he would come home and say, Mom, nobody cares about me. And I would say, oh, JT, they do. They do. Like, I just got off the phone with all of your teachers. We have meetings about you all the time. You're on a special plan, and nothing we could do would convince him that anyone cared about him at school. And I was so frustrated until I talked to the president of the Elizabeth Kubler-Ross Foundation. Of course, Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, the founder of the 5 Stages of Grief.
Right.
And she said, I was really exasperated when I talked to her, and she said, oh, that's easy. I know why. And I was like, why? We've been struggling with this. And she said, nobody's had the courage to validate his grief. And so no one had ever asked him about Jesse or the tragedy. And it was because they were afraid. They didn't have the skills and tools. Sure. They didn't want to remind him. If he said he wasn't okay, what would they do? And I think the important thing that I learned is that really, with grief, it's just about having the courage to be with someone where they are.
Right.
And we need our grief validated. Right. And it takes courage to do that. And so that's one of the reasons why I worked with Diane Gray of the Elizabeth Kubler-Ross Foundation and created programming around healthy grieving, because there's so much fear around it, and there are things that we move through in life, and grief is a natural part of life.
Is that part of the Choose Love movement curriculum?
It is.
The grief work?
It's an extension program.
I see. Okay. Right. So, yeah, the 5 stages. First is what? Denial, and then anger and bargaining. Then I think there's a period where depression, takes a person over, and then perhaps, what's the last one? Resolution or acceptance.
I'm looking it up because we
Yeah.
can look it up.
Yeah.
I actually wrote a paper on it and I can't remember them. So it's denial and isolation, number 1. 2 is anger. 3 is bargaining. 4 is depression, and 5 is acceptance.
Yeah.
And
How do you think, did you go through all those stages?
no, I didn't.
Tell me about your process.
I never denied it because I knew about practicing being present in situations, even through pain, about the importance of accepting reality as it is and not denying it. I didn't bargain, and I haven't been depressed yet. I did have anger, but interestingly enough, not at the shooter.
Tell me.
Because I knew intuitively that someone that could have done something so horrific must have been in a tremendous amount of pain.
Wow.
And I started learning about his life very early on, and I learned that he did everything right all the way up to the very end of his life. And actually his journey was similar to he and his mother's journey in the school system was similar to mine and JT's. And so I could relate to their journey and the difficulty that they had navigating that. And so I felt compassion for both of them. I think when something happens like that, we want to blame someone.
Sure.
Of course, everyone blamed Adam and his mom. But for me, that wasn't, I had to take it one step further because I had to ask myself, if it really was all their fault, then why had it happened many times before? Why is it happening continuously? 2018 was the deadliest year for school shootings.
Yeah.
Well, is that their fault too? No, it can't be their fault. Something else is broken. And so, I tried to take my part of the responsibility for it. And it was in that way that I could step up to the plate and be part of the solution. And that's been a tremendous part of my healing.
Right. So was there just some sort of systemic lack of validation? Is that what, like people have these needs and they're crying out and they're not heard? Is that part of the reason the acting out happens?
So when you look at the pathway to violence, it always starts with a grievance.
Okay.
And, Adam went into the school and was tested. He had special needs. They were known and not met. Just little things happened along the way where, he clearly needed help and he wasn't given help. He literally slipped through the cracks at every turn. There were state mandated home checks when his mother had pulled him out of school that were never done. And he did everything he was supposed to do when he was in school. He cried out for help. And when he was ignored, he waved big red flags. And he was still ignored. And to the point where it's like, at this point, it's easier for me to be angry for him than it is to be angry at him.
Wow,
but that's really helpful to me in my
sure
healing process, that
Absolutely.
I don't have that anger. I do have, it's not that I don't have anger though, because there are lots of things to be angry about. when you go through a mass shooting, like people that come in and take advantage of it, people that say it never happened.
Yeah. Oh, that's so complicated.
It is complicated.
So you told me about a story with you and JT where the shooting had happened, and you were aware that that it had happened, and you hadn't yet heard about whether Jesse had come through or not, and something sort of a characterological uh, awakening, if that's a way to put it, sort of hit you, like you recognized you had this duty to JT. Can you tell us more about that moment?
Yeah, well, just a little background. I really practiced being present with my kids. I was a single mom. I had a long commute, a job with long hours, and I always felt like I didn't get enough time with them. And when I was with them, I wanted to be present with them.
Mm.
And so we did not have a TV because I didn't want to come home and have to compete with a television set.
Mm-hmm.
We read books, we played games, we looked into each other's eyes. We really enjoyed ourselves. But I practiced that. So when JT and I were waiting at the firehouse, and this is where all the families were called to be reunited with their loved ones. And so by the time I got there, because remember I worked 45 minutes away, most of the kids had already left. And so there were some that were missing, and we had to put their names down on a list and then wait for hours. And during the course of waiting, I would have, JT was released from lockdown from his nearby middle school, and he waited with me. And I would have state troopers come up and ask me questions like, do you have a recent picture of your son? And then the next question was, about an hour later, did your son have any identifying marks on his body? And it was like, I think it was that question when I realized that JT was scanning me, like he was watching my every move. He was listening to every word that came out of my mouth. And I realized in that moment that everything that I did was modeling for him and teaching him how to handle difficulty, challenges, roadblocks, all the way up to tragedy for the rest of his life.
Wow.
And I credit that with my practice of being present, because I made a decision. I wanted to be present throughout this whole thing, even then. And so it helped me. It helped me. It strengthened me to be able to rise to the occasion and be the person that I wanted JT to grow into. And I think that if we have that idea that we are modeling our behavior for our kids, and they're watching us and they're learning, not just from what we say, but from everything that we do on a daily basis.
So how did you model the actual expression of your grief?
And I was very authentic in my feelings, but I mean, we cried together when we found out, but I tried the best that I could to be present for him and to attend to his needs and to be open and with my feelings and expressive and not to close down, to focus outward, not to focus inward on my pain, but to allow other people to come in and help us, and making sure that, you know, I'm a single mom. So JT had a big brother, actually, from Big Brothers and Big Sisters. So making sure that he was around, and having JT watch me lean on my support system like he was leaning on his. And, you know, I feel like when you practice being present in any situation, that is the number one way to live your life with the fewest regrets. Because I look back and I have I have very few regrets. And I think it's because I was present. And I think that that's a bigger challenge now than it was when I was with my two sons, because now we have more screen time. Now we have the cell phones. We had cell phones, but they, you know, they weren't as interactive, and I didn't have a TV, so I wasn't really competing with screens like we are today. And I feel like, you know, sometimes I go out to dinner and I was sitting next to a table and they'll have two just precious little kids, both on their screens, and then both parents on their phones. And I literally, like, one day, you're going to read about it probably, I'm going to go up to that table and say, wow, you have this incredibly beautiful family right here. And you could be looking into their eyes and appreciating them and loving them and laughing with them and being grateful together as a family. And you're on your screens? Come on, guys.
Yeah. You have the perspective that how precious it is to be with someone, you know. Yeah, there's a lot of wisdom in what you said, especially when you said that you leaned on other people. Because I find that I do that too. You know, I know how to process intense feelings inside myself, but you know, meditation and mindfulness, although that's what I teach, and I teach people how to attune to themselves and others in situations. I don't feel like you know, one path will get you all the way there. I feel like we're built to be relational, and we heal faster when we're in a community of open-hearted people that are sharing our pain with us.
It was incredible too, when I opened myself up to that, how many people literally, and I say that they carried me, even after I was telling them what I wanted to do, which was start this foundation and provide social and emotional learning to every child. They had issues with their kids in schools, and they believed in it, but literally I feel like they carried me for the first 2 years with funding and with events and planning all of that out. And they said, you just show up. You just, you know, work on creating what you want to create and just show up. And it was an incredible thing. I mean, you invest in relationships throughout the course of your life, and then that comes back to you when you need it. And
boy.
It probably saved my life.
Yeah, that social capital is so important. I have another question. You and I had talked when we first met. I came to a talk that you were giving at the University of Arizona at the medical center there, and you mentioned a chalkboard and a message that Jesse had actually left for you and JT the morning that he died, that was sort of prescient. Can you tell us that story?
Yes, I came back home a few days after Jesse's murder to get his clothes for the funeral. And it was on my way out that I noticed that he had written 3 words on our kitchen chalkboard shortly before he died. Those 3 words were nurturing, healing, love. Now, he was 6 years old, and so they were phonetically spelled because he was just learning to write. But I knew in that moment that if the shooter had been able to give and receive nurturing, healing love, the tragedy would never have happened. And I knew that was the solution. I actually found my purpose in that moment. I knew I would be spending the rest of my life spreading that message. And you can believe me, because 7 years later, it's what I've been doing all day long, every single day. I've devoted my life to that. But further than that, and as it pertains to grief, I feel like that was a spiritual awareness. How else can you explain that? That Jesse knew, not consciously, not in thought, but subconsciously, that he was not going to be around for much longer. He wanted to leave a message of comfort for his family and friends, and also inspiration. It's where we needed to turn. And we found a lot of comfort from that message, my entire family.
So you created a formula out of that message. And how do you use that?
So I knew what it meant to me, and I was connected to a doctoral professor who was the director of the Compassion, Creativity, and Innovation Center at Western Connecticut State University, Dr. Chris Cook. He came over and I said, look at this message, because I was blown away. And I said, I know what it means to me and my family. Is there a deeper meaning in it? And so Chris did some research, and he said, those 3 words are in the definition of compassion across all cultures. And he and I broke down the meaning of each of the words, and we found that it comprised a powerful and profound formula for choosing love in any situation, circumstance, or interaction that we will ever face. And that includes loss. And it's actually what I practice every day, all day long, and it comes directly from Jesse's message of nurturing, healing, love, and his example of courage that day. During his final few moments on Earth, he chose to use them to save his 9 of his classmates' lives before losing his own. And so we found that out very soon after the tragedy. And I realized then too that first of all, that was going to be my model for courage. If Jesse at 6 years old could use his final moments to lay down his life for his friends, which is the ultimate act of courage, I certainly could find the courage to take this tragedy and use it to make the world a better place. But that courage is also a model of courage for all of us, because we all have the same courage that Jesse showed that day. We all have that. And I'm not talking about the courage that it takes to lay down your life for your friends. Hopefully none of us will be called on to do that. But I'm talking about the courage that it takes to be kind when someone's not being kind to you, to be vulnerable, to speak your truth, to be who you really are. And then it takes courage to do the rest of the formula. Now, the formula derived from Jesse's message of nurturing, healing, love is this. Nurturing means loving kindness and gratitude. So being grateful. Healing literally means forgiveness, and forgiveness is probably the most important part of my journey.
Right.
And then love is compassion in action. Compassion has an empathetic component, which is actually a painful component, because empathy lights up the same receptors in our brain as physical pain. And then there's the action component. That's when you actively do something to help ease another's pain. And that's where science tells us all of, I say, the nurturing, healing love that we give out, we get back. So this formula is the basis, the foundation of our lifespan, no-cost social and emotional programming that we offer on our website. But it is also what I practice personally and try to model every single day of my life, all day long.
You're such a hero.
I'm not a hero. I'm just trying to, I know that what happened to my son was 100% preventable. And we have the solution. We just have to step outside of our comfort zones and what we have been doing that hasn't been working, by the way, to do what research tells us does work, research and experience. And so that does take courage, because I was explaining to some at-risk youth the other day. I was giving them a talk, and these were youthful violent offenders. These kids had experienced some horrific trauma in their lives. And so I was talking to them about choosing love. And one of the questions that I got was just beautiful. One of the kids said, how do you make it look so easy? And I said, oh, I love that question, because I stand up here and I have my little PowerPoint that I give all over the world every day. And I bet I do make it look easy. I said, but you know what? Choosing love is not easy. And it's not easy for me. I said, I was nervous to get up in front of you all because I really wanted to make a connection, and I know what I have to say can help you. And so, you know, we have some different ways that we practice courage. And one of our ways is doing a brave pose. And so I said, you know, I was actually in the back of the room doing my brave pose. If you saw me, and one of their teachers was laughing because she was standing next to me and I was explaining what I was doing. And I said, so I actually practice courage. And I know that courage is like a muscle. We have to practice it to strengthen it. And I said, you know, I get sad, I get mad, I get ticked and annoyed all day long. Just like everybody else, maybe more. And I use gratitude. We call gratitude the great mind shifter, because we all, I mean, we're talking about grief now, but even aside from grief, we all have 50 to 70,000 thoughts every single day that go through our head on average. And we know the majority, 70 to 80% of those are negative, and over 95% are repetitive. And so the interesting thing about thoughts through the latest neuroscience is that we can only have one thought at once. So I literally use gratitude, because you can't have a sad, angry, resentful, anxious thought and a grateful thought at once. I literally tick off gratitudes all day long when I want to shift my thinking.
What a great
Sometimes
practice.
I don't. Sometimes I want to be in it. Like I was telling you this morning, when Jesse's bus, his school bus, drove by the house and the kids got off across the street. And I'm thinking, but Jesse, I could picture him walking in the driveway. And how would that be? But instead, there's no child. I couldn't believe it. And so I sat with that for a while. But when I need to shift out of it, or I just don't want to linger there, I think of something that I'm grateful for. And it's usually something very small, like, oh, there's one rose left on my rose bush. And Jesse knows roses are my favorite flower. Thank you, Jesse. And then healing. So we have nurturing, which is gratitude. Healing literally means forgiveness. And forgiveness was the greatest gift I could have given myself. And, you know, I've had people that have literally told me, this is not something that you forgive. And I understand that. And there's no judgment. But for me, choosing to forgive, because it's a choice, was the only way for me to take my personal power back. Right.
Otherwise, you're tethered to the pain and the resentment for the rest of your life.
I mean, I'm going to give the suffering, troubled, neglected, bullied young man who murdered my son control over my thoughts that impact my feelings, that impact my behavior, are going to negatively impact the son that I have? No way. But what's the only way that I can take my personal power back? It's through choosing to forgive. I don't know any other way, honestly. And I learned there's so much science. I mean, I didn't really know. I didn't know how to forgive. I didn't understand what it meant. That for me, it simply means taking your personal power back, but it does start with a choice, and then it does become a process, because it's not something that, you know, just you make a choice and that's it forever. I find myself moving through forgiveness every day.
Sure. Toggle back and forth. That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
So when
process, and then one more character value, love is compassion in action, and it's the identifying, and then it's the action component. And literally another really huge part of my healing has been having the courage to step outside of my own tragedy and story and pain to help other people.
Mm-hmm.
And in doing so, and by the way, this is what science says as well, all of the nurturing, healing love that you give out, you get back. And I feel that every single day, and it's such a blessing. So when you have the courage to be grateful, to forgive, and to step outside of your own pain to help others, you're choosing love and making the world a better place, but helping yourself in the process.
Yeah, that's beautiful. Wow, what an example you're showing to all of us. So people are going to be watching this video, and likely their interest in the video is because they're grieving something on their own. Especially for those people who've are experiencing a real difficult time processing their grief. What advice might you give them?
It's very difficult. I don't know what advice. I mean, I personally relied a lot, I have to tell you, on my faith. And I believe that we are really spirits having a human existence, and that there is life after death. And Jessie left a lot of those messages. I mean, nurturing, healing, love, and other things that happened that were completely unexplainable, that really comforted me and made me realize that he's still around me and that he still exists. And I believe that we'll be reunited one day. So I have to tell you that my faith has been really really the foundation, I think, of my strength. But I do think that it's something that it's probably the most painful thing that you'll ever go through. But I think it's really important to be mindful of having the courage to be present with it. And I know that that's,
when you say be present with it, what do you mean exactly?
Don't resist or avoid going through it, because I believe I've seen people that have done that, and you're going to have to go through it at some point. So when you're at your lowest, maybe feel the connection that it brings. I mean, when I'm missing Jessie, I feel connected to him. And I know that that grief is a part of the love that we shared. And look at it that way and know that you will move through it. And like the grief for me happens every day. I feel like it goes like this, okay? If it were on a graph, I feel like I can go way down and I can cry. And I cry every day, by the way, still 7 years later, multiple times a day. But then I come up. Then I come up because I will use the formula. You know, I will shift my thinking to a gratitude intentionally, and it will help me. It will help bring me up. The focus outside of myself really helps. I'm usually busy doing something that is related to the Choose Love movement, and getting stories back from that of how we've impacted other lives. That's helpful. And so I'll recall one of those stories when I want to shift out of that lower trough and bring myself back up. But I think it's important that we remember, you know, to have courage through those times, and that they're going to happen, and to not fear them. Choose love over fear. It's not something to be afraid of. It's a natural part of life. And it's a natural part of love.
Yeah, I feel like the wisdom that you're bringing forth now is preventing that feedback loop where, you know, when you allow yourself to not feel your depression, but wallow in it, like get lost in it without mindfulness, being depressed like that is depressing. And when you don't feel your fear but are afraid of your fear, it just makes more fear. And that amplification comes from a lack of attunement to what is, and trying to hold it away as if that's even a possibility, because I just don't think you can really heal what you don't feel. You have to, like you said, you have, in order to get through it, you have to go through it.
And that inward focus is what causes depression. And that's why I think it's so vitally important to be mindfully aware of focusing outwards. And I think sometimes we feel like, oh my God, like my son was brutally murdered in his first grade classroom. Like there's nothing worse than that. But in actuality, early on, I remember thinking, okay, there has to be something worse than this. There has to be something. What could be worse than this? What I like had to find something that was worse than what I had gone through. And I came up with many scenarios. And one of them was like finding out that he had been in a child molester's basement for 3 weeks and tortured and sexually abused and then murdered. And for some reason, like I was like, okay, well, this isn't the worst thing that could have happened, right? And for some reason that helped me. And then, you know, people come up to me and they tell me they'll tell me their stories because I'm vulnerable with them. So it's such an honor that people will share with me after a talk, and they'll tell me stories, and they'll start out by saying, it's nothing like what happened to you. Like, in other words, it's not as bad as what happened to you, but this is what happened to me and it hurt me. And I'm thinking in my mind, oh my God, no, it's not like what happened to me. It's much worse than what happened to me. So I think it's important for us to remember that grief is a part of life and not get caught up in like, oh, my pain is the worst pain and nobody's ever felt this pain. And guess what? People have felt that pain, and people have felt much worse pain. And I think it's helpful, and it was really helpful to me, to look at other examples of how people move through that pain. That's when that woman was in my living room and telling me, you know, that she you know, she experienced it 20 years ago and I'm never going to get through it. I'm never going to get over the pain. And I was like, okay, no, I reject that, because that's not going to be my journey. I'm going to create my own journey. But I think that looking at other people's journeys and the decisions that they made and how they moved through it, and then saying, aha, I like that. I like that part of that person's journey, and I'm going to learn from that, and I'm going to take it and I'm going to practice it in my own life. And no, I don't like the decision that person made, and that is not going to be a part of my journey. But I think it's important that, you know, there's so many books out there, and I, in the beginning, like for the first year, I just read every book I could get my hands on of people that had lost children. And we had people that would come in to Newtown, and they would talk with the families. And one woman wrote Sugar Cookie and a Nightmare. And it was about her daughter who was swept away by a rogue wave. And she was just so open and honest about her grief. And she ended up giving her son, she had a son too, to his father for a couple of years, and moving in with Elizabeth Kubler-Ross and really delving into grieving. And she's now actually a PhD, and she helps grieving families.
I think that's so beautiful how
right.
you and other people really make meaning out of the horrible things that can happen in life. And that moment where, you know, you stood up, that moment of self-protection where you told the woman, that's not going to be my experience. that you exhibited some great strength and courage and some creative chutzpah, like you knew you were going to figure out a better way. And that's
I knew too.
yeah, but out of necessity, right? But I love that about you,
And
Scarlett.
I think, Mark, you brought up a really good point too. It's an important part of your journey to find meaning in your suffering. I think that when you don't, that's when you get into trouble. And I have tried to find meaning in my suffering. I found meaning in Jesse's message of nurturing, healing love. And I think, I try to honor and remember him every day. It's interesting. I paint, and I paint portraits, and I love painting portraits because it's very intimate. And I've painted with my art instructor for 30 years, and my mom had just taken pictures of JT, Jesse, and I a week before his murder, and I had sent them to my art instructor, and I wanted her to do, for my Christmas present, I was going to have her do what she calls a party pick. She charges $100 per face, and she does it on fun backgrounds, and I was going to have her do one for me. And so I had already sent her all the pictures. And then when Jesse was murdered, it was a couple weeks later, and I remembered, oh gosh, I was asking Jane to do this picture for me, and I texted Jane and I said, you have the last pictures that were ever taken of Jesse. And I remember her texting back and saying, well, I'll actually do a whole portrait for you if you promise you'll hang it. And I always thought that was a strange thing to say. And so the next time I saw her, I was like, I don't understand why you asked me if I would hang a portrait of Jesse, JT, and I, because of course I would. I mean, that's a special gift. Why would you say that? And she said, well, she had painted a portrait of a family, and she gets paid a lot of money to be commissioned to paint people's portraits. And she said the son had died after she was commissioned to do this portrait, and the mom never picked up the painting. And so it was interesting for me. It was a learning moment, because whereas if you look around my house, I have pictures of Jesse all over, and I've probably at this point painted almost every picture that I have of Jesse. Now I have them stacked against the wall because we don't have any wall space left. But I think that, to your point of finding meaning in your suffering and honoring and remembering, when we don't honor and remember, it's out of fear. And I see that a little bit in our community because we don't have a memorial. And that's, I think that it's done out of fear. But I think it takes courage to honor and remember. But wow, what an incredible lesson to teach our kids and future generations. It's really important to honor and remember our loved ones. But it does take courage.
Yeah. Well, so help the people that are watching this video find you and the Choose Love movement. Share the website information and how they can perhaps get involved or get some curriculum that might help them through their grief.
Well, so I created the Choose Love movement as a place for everyone to come together to be part of the solution. We have issues, and they're not getting better. And so that means what we're doing isn't working. And so we do know that teaching kids social and emotional learning reduces mental illness. That includes depression and suicide, substance abuse, bullying, loneliness, a lot of the issues that we're experiencing that then translate out into society when we graduate. And so this is what our lifespan programming is. And honestly, that helped me a lot too, learning social and emotional intelligence. I was 44 years old when Jesse was murdered. And when I was researching a solution, knowing that was 100% preventable, I found it. And it's called social and emotional learning. It's teaching people how to have healthy relationships, how to manage our emotions, how to be resilient, how to make responsible decisions, just among other essential life skills. And I realized very quickly that I didn't have a lot of these skills and tools, even as an adult. And these are skills and tools we're not born with. We have to learn them. Yeah. And if we didn't learn them at home and or in school, we're now adults and we don't necessarily have them, but we can learn them at any age. I'm living proof of that. So by helping create this program, I learned them. And I have to tell you, that was also instrumental in my healing. And so everything that we have is no cost. So anyone is welcome to come to the website, which is jesselewischooselove.org, Jesse, JESSELEWIS, chooselove.org, and explore what we have, introduce it to your kids' schools. We have programming for families and communities and small businesses. We're developing programming for the workplace based on big demand for it. But we do have online training, which might be interesting for people. It's geared for teachers, but it can teach anyone really what I've been talking about tonight. And maybe hopefully taking notes from tonight will also help, because you can take what you found was helpful, reject what you didn't agree with. But I think that we all learn from one another. And I think it's really helpful to have these courageous conversations. You know, one of my favorite quotes now is a Ram Dass quote, where he says, "We're all just walking each other home." And it's so true. I'm a little bit different person now than I was before Jesse was murdered. I'm much more compassionate, and I practice compassion in action much more than I did. And I just feel like I choose love now, and it's made my life, believe it or not, better in ways. It's such a kind of irony, maybe, that you know, out of my most horrible tragedy, I've been able to grow so much personally and offer so much to others. But literally, there's a scientific term for it that I learned as well that nobody's ever heard of, because of our negative bias and us always focusing on the negative. Think about our thoughts every day, but it's post-traumatic growth. And I think that that's another term that, you know, your viewers would want to think about and look into.
Love that.
As we, you know, everyone's heard of PTSD, and that's the negative consequence.
Right. Yeah.
But there's this other thing that has as much research, by the way, but nobody's ever heard of it. And it's called post-traumatic growth. And that's what the vast majority of us experience when they go through difficulty, roadblocks, challenges, all the way up to trauma. How are we shaped and molded anyway as human beings, other than our thoughtful responses to what happens to us in life?
Absolutely.
That includes loss and grief. And so we can create our own path, and we can use that path to help others and to even grow ourselves. And there's a scientific term for it. And I think that that's the intention that we set. And of course, our road is going to be bumpy, and it's not going to be without pain and suffering. All of this knowledge and awareness, I think, helps take away the fear out of the process of grief, but it does not take away the pain and suffering. because I think pain and suffering are there, and it's part of love, and it's part of life, and it's part of being human. But I don't think that we have to suffer so much fear. And so that is what choosing love is all about, choosing love over fear.
Well, that's a beautiful message. Thank you so much for your time today, Scarlett. It's I know that there are some real gems of wisdom that people are going to be able to take from this conversation. And I want to remind people that if they want more information about the Choose Love movement, to go to the JessieLewisChooseLove.org. Is that right?
JessieLewisChooseLoveMovement.org.
Movement.org. Okay. And then I, of course, create skillfully aware programming. I help people work with their triggers, thoughts, and sensations so they can be their own best therapist and work through their own emotions. And you can find more about my work at skillfullyaware.com.
And Mark, you were right actually about my own website.
What?
JessieLewisChooseLove.org.
Okay. All right, good. Okay, wonderful. All right. Scarlett, thank you. I appreciate you.
Thank you so much. I appreciate you too and all that you do. Thank you.
Okay. Well, I know we'll talk soon.
Okay.
Okay. Bye now.
Bye-bye.